Hello everyone. Today I want to talk about building accessible apps with Jetpack Compose. What does it mean that the app is accessible? Well, it has to be just usable by people with various kinds of disabilities. For example, in case of blindness, people cannot see the screen, but can usually hear the text, so they can the text pronounced by text-to-speech engine. So they can use additional apps like TalkBack, which I will show you on the next slides, to know what is on the screen, even if they don't see it. You may recall, for example, the content description parameter on the image or icon composables. They are for mostly for blind people. But there are also other kinds of disabilities, for example, related to touching. Someone may have no arms or one arm or be paralyzed and cannot use the touchscreen normally. There may be temporary disabilities caused, for instance, by injuries, or the situational disabilities. For example, sun is shining on the screen, so we need a high contrast. If we sum up all those people with all the disabilities, it may give even up to 15% of the overall population, or 1 billion of the people all over the world. So probably some of those people may be in the target of your app, of the app you are developing. Why else accessibility matters? For the app owners, the not accessible app may mean that they need to pay for lawyers because they may be sued against the accessibility. Only in the United States, the last year, there were more than 4,000 accessibility cases, and some of them are also about mobile apps. Okay, let's jump into the technical section, which you probably expected on this conference. First topic I want to tell you about is a minimal touch target or pointer target. Basically, the touchable area of composables like buttons, checkbox, switches, and so on shouldn't be too small. Why? For example, your users may have very thick fingers, so they cannot precisely position it on the small buttons, or maybe their hands may shake, so they cannot also touch one small button. But if the size of touchable area is large enough, there is no such issue. Okay, so what is that minimum? 48 dp in each of the dimensions. So for example, extra wide button, let's say 200 dps, but only 40 dps tall is not enough. It has to be 48 in both dimensions. And how to achieve that? Well, you can calculate how many dps you need to add and add that amount of padding yourself manually. But fortunately, we have a minimum interactive component size modifier. If you add it, it will calculate how much padding is needed, and will add it to reach this 48 dp. However, if you are using the standard composables from the standard library like button or checkbox or text button, outline button, you don't need to add this modifier because it is applied internally by those composables. You might be interested in adding it if you are creating your own composables out of something low level like row, column, or box. I set the touch target or pointer target. In case of mouse or other pointing devices like this trackball here, there is a ball which you can move. There is a pointer target, but the rules are the same. Yes, you can connect the mouse to your smartphone, to your Android phone, via Bluetooth or USB OTG. That's why in Compose, not only in Compose, but also before in Android, we have hover colors, and in Compose, we have hoverable modifiers. Yeah. The next topic, font scale. In Jetpack Compose, you have to specify the text size in SP unit. You cannot use DP for text size. By default, one SP is equal to one DP, but if you increase the font size somewhere in the system settings, it may change. The maximum scale currently supported by Android is 200%. It means that one SP will become two DPs. It will be twice as big as it was. What does it mean for developers? Well, take a look at this screenshot on the left side. You may not anticipate that text here may increase its size. So, for example, you may put everything here in one column without vertical scroll, and because it's not needed, add some spacers here. But if you take into account that text may be resized, maybe its size may increase, then you have to add scrollability here, vertical scroll, and also, for example, this bottom bar should not be scrollable, so you have to place it in another parent, another container than this text which scrolls. Also, this top bar, this up bar, should also not scroll. And take a look at this button. It contains a scalable text, so its size cannot be specified in DP because it won't work. You have to specify only the padding in DPs. Yeah, so what you can do in the code. There is a handy font scale parameter in preview annotation, so we can easily check how your composables behave with the large font scales. It's much faster than going to system settings, changing the font scale, and then reverting it to default after the testing. To add vertical scrollability to the column, you can use vertical scroll modifier, and there is also a similar one for the horizontal scroll in case of rows. In some cases, very, very huge text may break your layout, your complex layout, especially if there are non-scalable elements besides. So in that cases, you may need to limit the height of text. You can do that by limiting lines, number of lines displayed by the max line parameters of the text composable. In this case, you may also be interested in the overflow parameter. Let's see how it works. When you don't specify anything and text is longer than it can be in the bounds of the text composable, it gets clipped. Clip is the default value of overflow modifier, and it just cut the part of the text which does not fit. It is the worst option because users don't know what is cut, what gets cut. Moreover, in some cases, if the cutting point is between the words, it may change the meaning. User may think that his phone is charging, but in fact the charge may be temporarily limited. But this text got clipped, it's not visible. Slightly better is to use the ellipsis modifier, ellipsis parameter overflow. It differs from clip by adding those three dots. They indicate that there is something invisible part of the text. And we have also visible value. It means that Compose will try to render all the text even outside the bounds of your text composable. Here you can see that the size of this text is 20 dp. Don't do that, don't hard code the size of the text in dp, but for the illustration purposes, it is here. And as you can see, text is rendered even outside of this size, but still in the bounds of the parent, so it will never exceed the parent bounds. But when you are using ellipsis, also keep in mind that if there are some text which differ only by their suffixes, and they are displayed on the same screen, they may be not distinguishable. For example, let's see those two addresses, Wall Street and Washington Avenue. If you have only WA, you don't know which one is which. So things like addresses are usually not good candidates for ellipsis if they are not visible anywhere as a whole. The next topic, focus order. Basically, the focus should not jump somewhere far away. The next focusable element should be the closest one, not only physically closest, but also logically closest. How to do that? First, let's see this simple example. I am moving the focus next using the next IME action on the keyboard, and it moves from the first name to email and then to last name, as a red arrow shows. But the more logical way is from first name to the last name and then to email. So how to do that? We have two modifiers for that, focus requester and focus properties. Handy create as many requesters as you need using the create refs method, and you can use this handy destructuring declaration for that. Next, assign each focus requester using the focus requester modifier to its field. And finally, in the focus properties, set what is the next next focus requester. For example, here, normally focus goes from first name to email because those text fields are in the same parent. Last name is in another parent, but we say that the next node after the first name is the last name, which is here, and the email goes after the last name. Of course, in this very simple example, you can just use two columns instead of column and row, and it will also work. But in complex layouts, you may be interested in focus requester and focus properties. On the previous screencast, you could see the next action on the keyboard, but there are also other actions. Next action is suitable for all the form fields except the last one, except the final ones which submits the form. So for the last fields in each form, you should use something like action send or search or go, depending on the context. They may look like this, for example, like on this screenshot, and how to set them. There is a keyboard options parameter of text field. You can set the IME action here. For example, here is the action send. And in the keyboard actions, you can set the callback, which gets executed after user chooses this action. But you may skip this callback if using action next and previous, and you don't want to perform any additional actions. Next and previous will just move the focus forward and backward without any additional code. And now the most complex part of this talk, TalkBack. What is TalkBack? Well, it's a screen reader application provided by Google, but also maybe by Samsung or other manufacturers. And it reads the screen mainly for blind people. They cannot see the screen, but they can hear the text pronounced by text-to-speech engine. On this screencast, you can see toast here. You can enable those toasts. It is called speech echo or visual speech output in the TalkBack developer settings. Very useful for development. But before you enable TalkBack, keep in mind that the navigation when TalkBack is enabled is significantly different than normally when it is disabled. First of all, basically every gesture with one finger, either drag or a single tap or swipe left or right, will not cause any click actions, but will only move the focus. It won't execute any on-click callbacks. The current focus is pointed by this green frame here. It may also be blue, for example, in case of Samsung phones. Okay, why is that? Why the single tap does not click and it only moves the focus? Imagine that you are blind, you cannot see the screen, and there are some buttons. So before you click, before you execute some on-click actions, you have to know what this button does. So first you need to hear what TalkBack says, and then if you are sure that this is the action you want to perform, then you can use double tap to click. You can use double tap everywhere, not only on the focus node. And to swipe, to move focus quickly left or right, you can either, to move to focus next or previous, you can swipe left or right. So it means that you cannot perform the swipe to delete or pull to refresh actions normally when TalkBack is enabled. I will show you how to deal with it. And you can also explore screen by touch. If you just drag with one finger over the screen, it will move the focus between the focusable elements. You don't have to go one by one from next to previous, from previous to next. You can explore by touch from any direction. There are many more gestures. Tapping with 2 fingers, 3 fingers, tap and hold, drawing some gestures. So users, when TalkBack is enabled, can perform very efficient navigation, like use system back navigation, or jump to the next section, not to the next focusable node. But it is not the topic of this presentation, so let's jump into the code. How to make your composables TalkBack friendly. Let's start with something very simple, a switch with label. How to do such switch? If you do just like that, most straightforward code probably, a row and text and the switch inside, it will probably look correctly, but it is not so accessible. Why? There are two issues. First major issue is that those elements are separate from the TalkBack perspective. So as you can see on the toast at the bottom, TalkBack announces newsletter, just a text, and then off or on switch. There is no information that this newsletter is related to the switch, and there is no information that this switch is related to newsletter. So you can just switch on and off, toggle it, but it is unlabeled. So you don't know that it switches newsletter. But keep in mind that you can see this label, but if user is blind, he cannot see this. He may move focus, for example, from the bottom by export by touch. So he may not notice that there is a switch for newsletter. And the second minor issue here, not related to TalkBack, but related to accessibility, is that the area of this label and this empty space between switch and label is not clickable, it's not interactive, but it also should be. So every click in this area of the label, this empty space, should also toggle the switch. How to fix it? Fix is very simple. Just add a toggleable modifier to the row. Remember that it should be toggleable, not clickable if there is a switch. Why? You can see it clickable in many tutorials on the internet or Stack Overflow, how to make a switch with label. But clickable will not announce the state, so user will not know if switch is enabled or disabled, and it will not announce double tap to toggle, but double tap to activate. So imagine that switch is already on, and user hears that newsletter, double tap to activate, but in fact, double tap will disable newsletter. So don't use clickable for stateful composables containing switch or checkbox, but toggleable. Here is the callback, value change callback. It has to be set here, not on the switch itself. Callback on check change on the switch must be null. Why? If it will be not null, then TalkBack will announce the switch also. So the entire row will be interactive, and this switch will be also interactive as a separate node, which we don't want. Here we also have a role set to switch, so TalkBack recognizes that it is a switch, and padding modifier is after the toggleable, so this padding area is also interactive. Yeah. Let's see the full anatomy of label spoken by TalkBack. First, we have the state description. On this screencast, you can see on and off in case of toggleable, but you can customize it, enabled, disabled, or ticked, not ticked, like you have here. And state applies only to stateful composables like switch, checkbox, radio button. They may be three-state checkbox, but it not applies to stateless composables like simple texts or just clickable buttons which do not hold any state. Next, the most important part, which is pretty much always present, a content description. If there are some text inside, some texts, they will become content description. For example, here, newsletter is a content description. If there will be more text in this row, they will be concatenated to make a content description. In case of images, icons, you have to provide the content description yourself. There is a required parameter for that. Next, we have the class name. This is how it is called in the pre-compose world. Before the compose, we have classes like Android.view.button and so on. In Compose, we don't have classes, but functions. Composables are functions. And you cannot set the class name directly. Instead, in Compose, you set the role, and Jetpack Compose library will somewhere internally map this role and few other parameters to make a class name recognized by TalkBack service. Keep in mind that TalkBack must also support old apps made without Jetpack Compose. And at the end, we have a click label. It is activate for clickable and toggle for toggleable, but you can also customize it. Two important rules when formulating the text for those labels. First, don't mix, maybe like that, don't mix those elements. For example, don't include words like button or image inside the content description. Button or image is a role. Set the appropriate role if the default one is not suitable for you, but don't include it in the content description because the text will be duplicated if you do so. And don't rely on any particular order of those items. This is the default order in English, but user can change this order in the TalkBack settings. Okay, so how to set those labels? Everything can be done in the semantics modifier. Notice that there is a curly brace. This is a function. There are not simple parameters like here. And here we have state description. For state, there should be at least two states. Here I am using the hard-coded strings for the simplicity of this presentation. But in the real apps, you should, of course, use string resource here. So they are localized to the language of the user interface. On-click label can be set either via semantics, but also by other modifiers. The clickable has optional on-click label parameter. If you are using this on-click label semantics, then you can set action here to null. You don't need to duplicate on-click or on-change callback. It will work even if the null is here. But if callback is not null here, it will be executed even if it is different from this on-click. Of course, this will be executed, this action, not null action, only if this action is invoked using TalkBack. Simple click, normal click will just invoke this callback. And here we have a role, but role can also be set in some other modifiers like this toggleable. I think that's all about the semantics. Now take a look at content description. You have to provide a content description for composables like icon or image. You cannot omit it. This parameter is required. You have to put something there. If you set some not empty text, it will be announced by TalkBack. As you can see here, TalkBack also said that it is an image because the default role of icon is an image, so you don't need to set it via semantics modifier. If you use empty string as a content description, TalkBack will say unlabeled image, not so good, not so accessible. If you set it to null, the TalkBack will not say anything. This composable will be ignored. You cannot focus on it. It won't receive the green frame. It may look the worst option, but there are some cases when it is okay to set null, or we should set null. Let's see this screenshot. Here I'm not sure how it is visible, but here is a horizontal line, a divider of this title and rest of the section. Let's assume that it is an image. In this case, you should not set the content description. It should be null here, because this element is purely decorative. It doesn't add any value for users. TalkBack would say, hey, here is the divider. You cannot do anything with it. So you should set null here. You should also set null to content description for images which already have some labels nearby, nearby composables. For example, this cube is only an illustration to geometry, like this triangle to polygons. So it doesn't make sense to set description to polygons to this triangle and also leave polygons here. Instead, you should set null description to the triangle, but merge all those, in this case, 3 nodes, this image, polygons text, and this number, in one accessibility node. I will show you how to do that. So TalkBack will announce it node as one, not as separate nodes. You can also here see here and other images like this tick. It may look similar to, for example, this cube, but they are very different. This tick is not an illustration to text nearby. Here is the same tick but different text. This tick means that the item here on this page has some property. It has materials, it has textures. It is not UV mapped and so on. So those icons should have content descriptions, but they also should be merged with the nearby texts. On the other hand, we can see here icon buttons. They, of course, need to have some labels. So TalkBack user will know what they do. This is, for example, for report action, report item. This is for share. And here we have expand collapse handle, also clickable elements. So also should have a label. This image has a description here, so they should merge. And how to merge them? It is very simple. Just set the merge descendants parameter of semantics modifier to true. Be careful, this is not a property. This is not in a lambda, but a normal parameter. You may ask now why this row worked, why this text was merged with switch, even if we haven't used the merge descendants here. This is because the toggleable does merging descendants by default. It works if none of the children are focusable in the accessibility mode. So if the switch has no callback, then toggleable will merge descendants. You don't need to set the merge descendants parameter here. Okay, let's jump into the next topic. You may recall that I said swipe left or right when TalkBack is enabled, won't fire the swipe to delete actions. So how to provide them for TalkBack users? There is a custom actions semantics property for it. It takes a list of custom accessibility actions. Each action consists of a label and the callback, which gets executed when user starts this action. So, for example, if you have, let's say, swipe to delete, right to delete item, and swipe left to archive item, then you can add actions like this. TalkBack will recognize that, hey, actions are available. Use tab with 3 fingers to view, and it will bring some menu like this, when user can choose the appropriate action. And the last TalkBack related topic I want to cover on this presentation is the live regions. What are live regions? Let's imagine you have a calendar. We omitted the grid with days here for simplicity. We're interested only in this label with the current month and year, and in these buttons, which are switching to the previous or next month. Normally, TalkBack announces only the currently focused node. So it will set that previous month button double tap to activate, but it won't say what is the current month. So user may need to change the focus here, touch this item or swipe left to know what is the month. You can see the screen if you are watching this recording, but if user is blind, he cannot see this label. How to fix it, how to do it better without forcing user to change the focus? Well, we can mark this text with current month and year with the live region semantics property. Live region means it's every change to this composable, it's announced by TalkBack, even if this node is not currently focused. So as you can see here, I am clicking only on buttons, next and previous, but TalkBack also announces which is the current month, even if it is not focused. There is no green frame here. What is important here, live region requires a content description parameter. It has to be set. It only reads the content description, even if it is a text and this value of the text is the same as content description. There are 2 modes, polite, which allows TalkBack to finish the current speech if it is speaking something at the time of the change of live region. And there is also assertive mode, which will cause that TalkBack will interrupt even in the middle of the sentence and start announcing this live region. That was the last semantic property I wanted to tell you about, but there are many, many more semantic properties in Jetpack Compose. You can read about them in the official documentation, which I also link later in this presentation. The next topic I want to cover is color blindness. On this screen, you can see differences between normal vision and various kinds of color blindness. Not every people can see colors normally. You can simulate various kinds of color blindness in the developer settings, not accessibility settings, but developer settings on your Android smartphone. But keep in mind, it will take effect only on the physical screen of physical device. If you use it on the emulator or on the remote device connected to some device farm, or do a screenshot or screencast, or use tool like screen copy, you will not see the changed colors. It will be visible only on the physical device. Okay, what are the issues and challenges with color blindness? Let's see this form. So here, the invalid field differs from valid one only by color of the frame. But in some kinds of color blindness, red is not distinguishable from green. You can see here that they look the same. How to fix it? we need to add some other factors, something else than only color, which differentiates valid and invalid fields. For example, simple icons. But the better option is to add text with error, with description, what exactly is wrong with this input. It will give more insights to users. To do that, set is error property to true and supporting text in the text field. This is error property will not only add those green colors, it's red colors here, but it will also add special semantics properties. So TalkBack will also announce that this is an error. You don't need to include the error word here in the text. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say. Here are the materials I used when making this presentation. The first link is to my blog post, which I recently published about how to provide accessibility in your native Android app with Jetpack Compose. First part is published. The next part, maybe two next parts are in progress, work in progress, will be published in the following weeks, I think. And here you have the official Jetpack Compose documentation and some other external third-party resources. That's all. Thank you for watching. Here are places where you can find me on the internet. If you have any question related to accessibility after this stream, or you are watching the recording, don't hesitate to contact me. If you have any feedback related to this talk, what I done great, what I could do better, you can use this link or this QR code to fill the anonymous feedback form. Okay, thank you for watching, and it's the time for questions and answers.
Thank you a lot. That was a very great session, and yes, accessibility is a very great topic to be discussed, and engineers should take into consideration and develop add this feature in their apps. Okay, so yeah, that's time of questions. So please send your questions, and we will answer them. Okay, that seems that we already have some questions here. So, yeah, that's a good question. How to consider testing accessibility in our apps?
Yeah, there are many ways for testing accessibility. By default, on Android, on the Play Store, you have the app called Accessibility Scanner. This is official app from Google. You can download it and you can test. You can scan your app screen by screen. It will detect some issues which can be detected automatically, like too small touch target or too small contrast. It will be covered by my next blog post, which will be published in the following days, I think. If you are publishing your apps to the Play Store, there are also pre-launch reports. So they probably use the same engine as the accessibility scanner, so you can see the same accessibility reports there. And finally, you can test it manually, or there are specialized companies which test accessibility, do the accessibility audits for you. Yeah, I think that's all for this question.
Perfect. So we have another question here. Does accessibility differ from phones to tablets and foldables?
That's a good question. I think in terms of rules or the principles you have to follow, it doesn't differ. You have to provide always the same minimum touch target, minimum contrast, and so on. Yeah.
Okay. And we have another question here.
Yeah, and for Compose,
For Compose JUnit Compose UI test, they all run against the same semantics tree that assistive technologies like TalkBack use. You have to learn how to check the semantic properties.
we have the Espresso accessibility checks. I haven't included it in the answer, but yes, it's correct. You can use it for test accessibility, but those checks are, at the time of I'm saying, these are very limited in comparison to, for example, accessibility scanner or audit.
Okay, it looks like this was the last question, but I have a question for you. And if anyone has another question, you can send it. We still have time. But for now, I have a question. I was wondering regarding TalkBack feature. Do we have any access to modify the audio, or have any access to edit the audio that's spoken by the device, or is it just managed by the system?
Yeah, there are options to modify the audio settings. For example, you can increase or decrease the speed of the speech. There are also other audio settings. At glance, I cannot tell you about exact settings, but certainly there are.
Yeah, I understand. Okay. Okay, we have another espresso accessibility checks run for all the composables.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so that's perfect. I guess we don't have any other questions. Thanks a lot for your talk and thanks for your time. And that's it for this session. We could have a break and get back with the next session at 9:30, I guess. Okay,
Okay,
thanks
thank
a lot.
you.
Thank you.